as we see that history catching up to reality, you've got a pullback. It's off, what, 40% from its high, and it's building a base at this level, 38, 40,000, and I still have 200. A year ago, Michael Saylor mopped the floor with Frank Giustra in an awesome debate. Gold is still in the dumps. It's still the same price it was 10 years ago. Gold is dead money. Bitcoin, meanwhile, is continue to make inroads and triumph after triumph after triumph. So is Frank going to go full into the olive oil business now and give up trying to be a money manager because he's almost as bad as Peter Schiff? It doesn't matter what any government says about Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin is absolutely decentralized and exists entirely outside of any individual, group, corporation, or government control. Governments are just waking up to the fact that they have no input in terms of impacting Bitcoin whatsoever, and they're moving from thinking, oh, we're going to ban Bitcoin, knowing now that they can't ban Bitcoin, to understanding that it's fear of missing out, or FOMO. The countries that hoard and mine Bitcoin the biggest and the fastest are going to be in a much better position than the latecomers. That's the current position amongst various governments, except for in Europe, where they are literally brain dead, where the EU is coming out and making it clear that they're not interested in participating in the 21st century economy whatsoever. They died. The only thing, but they haven't been buried yet. So that'll come probably in 2022, because I noticed that the euro is going to be parity with the dollar and heading to new all-time lows, probably in the 60-cent region. So the entire EU can be flushed down the toilet because the leadership there are bureaucratic, sclerotic morons. They can be just disregarded entirely. I think Elon Musk will probably buy France and turn it into a place that's worth going to. Well, you come to Bitcoin who you are. If you're somebody who's into education and you're a professor and into monetary history, you write a book like Saifedean Ammous. If you're somebody like Michael Saylor, who is in the software business in Virginia, with who's kind of close to the center of power in DC, who does, I would imagine, some contracting work for the government, you would have some comments about the U.S. government. Michael Saylor has also said he sees Bitcoin as being world reserve asset and the U.S. dollar as being world reserve currency. Now I never understood that argument. I don't think that argument makes any sense. Nobody who's looked at it agrees with him on that. And that's not going to be the case whatsoever. The dollar is completely being destroyed. It's being flushed down the toilet. The price is at a high relative to the last few years of performance, but usage amongst global economies is dropping. It's under 60%. It'll soon be under 50%. And we've seen a major sea change in the last few months. And we're now on a commodity-based global economy. Russia, the ruble, is reflecting that. It's trading at some recent highs, as commodities take center stage. And the ultimate commodity, the commodity that Paul Tudor Jones called the fastest horse in the race, is Bitcoin. And it'll outperform all other commodities and all other securities and remain as the best performing asset for the next 10 years. But I don't see the US dollar, as Michael Saylor argues. I don't buy that argument whatsoever. So I'm not surprising that he would have a favorable disposition toward comments coming out of the U.S. government. I don't see that as being important or relevant either in any case, but he's a guy who supports dollar as world reserve currency. So, I mean, if it's his MO, that's fine. But, I don't agree with it. And the Bitcoin is not in any way tied to any government's position toward it. Governments have only one decision: either start mining and hoarding Bitcoin or become irrelevant. The central banks still think that, we just need to print more money. People are saying, but they don't understand that actually that just causes the inflation that's empowering Russia. The tactic from the Russian point of view, if I can put myself in the mind of the strategists in Russia, is that, look, everybody against Russia is going to fight us by printing money, which only makes our commodities worth more in value and makes the ruble stronger. So how, bring it on. Right, so you go from a unipolar US dollar reserve currency to a multipolar world with a few different currencies out there. So you have the dollar, which will be a fading currency. You have a gold-backed ruble, which is going to be aligned with China, Iran, Brazil, the BRIC nations. And then you have Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is being adopted by countries. We see that now in Central America with El Salvador. And we can talk about this new fund we're starting, by the way, in El Salvador called El Zonte Capital. You can get information about it if you do an email to hello@elzontecapital.com. And we'll see other regions in Central America and Latin America begin to adopt Bitcoin. And now we see more action in Africa. There's a country in Africa today that just announced they're making Bitcoin legal tender. So that will be a big theme in Africa. Those countries looking to leapfrog the entire fiat money system and banking system and just want to leap into the 21st century, that they can just go to a Bitcoin standard and bypass all this malarkey with central banks and fiat money and all the bureaucrats. They can just go to a hard money Bitcoin standard and be immediately participating in the economics of the 21st century. As I think I've pointed out. So number one, you don't have true price discovery in gold, right? The price, as we see, it doesn't really move, even though the inflation is absolutely out of control and the money printing is out of control. Gold is not moving because you don't have genuine price discovery in gold because there's too much of concentrated in few hands.
It is moving, but you want leaps and bounds.
No, it's not moving. Over 10 years, it's done nothing. It's at 0% in 10 years. It's been dead money for 10 years, Daniela. That's dead money. I mean, it's underperforming cash. It's underperforming negative interest rate sovereign bonds. It's probably the worst. It's horrible. So you don't get any price discovery. Michael Saylor made the very excellent point that the industry itself is constantly selling gold, and they're not putting gold on their balance sheet. They're not hoarding gold. They're just gold salespeople. They talk a good game, but they're not actually for gold in that way. The industry has a long track record of dumping its own product and manipulating the price of its own product. So the industry itself is corrupt and nonsensical. So it's just, if gold was free to trade based on what's happening in the inflation environment, that would be a different story, but it's not. And now you've got a competitor with Bitcoin, which is eating gold's lunch. And second of all, the mining of gold, I got to the point where I couldn't accept it anymore. It's too toxic. It's too poisonous. There's too much slave labor involved. And Bitcoin is better than gold in every metric. And it's not doesn't have the toxicity of gold. So why bother with gold? I mean, I understand that you've got gold-backed currencies in these other countries, and that's a factor, and that's part of the dynamic. But I feel comfortable walking away from gold and focusing purely on Bitcoin. If you were to remove Bitcoin mining from the electric grid of the world, carbon emissions would be completely not changed one iota, because they're using stranded energy, they're using wasted energy, and they're using renewable energy. That's the vast majority of energy. And according to the Mining Council, which Michael Saylor started and he's a part of, the carbon emissions of Bitcoin, even though the hash rate's gone up dramatically, carbon emissions have gone down. So we're heading to an era of zero carbon emissions for Bitcoin. It's the cleanest energy. It's the cleanest industry in the world. So it's not dirty, and you can't use that word. Compared to gold, which is toxic, dirty, slave labor. It fosters bad behavior. You know, and I know, anyone who's been in the markets, that futures-based ETF products are almost guaranteed losers. It's a horrible product. It's not suitable for retail. It's not suitable for any investor at all. That product was launched. I think more than one was launched. They're doing horribly. So why would Gary Gensler purposefully launch a known toxic product, garbage product, into the market and not allow for an ETF, spot price ETF, that's already established itself on markets around the world? And his arguments against price discovery are fallacious and misguided. Why would he do that? Why is Gary Gensler? So it's a shame that Gary Gensler is such an obviously he is a regulator who's in the pocket of Wall Street, who considers Bitcoin to be a threat. There's absolutely no question about this. The Gary Gensler is corrupt. I mean, he just talked to Jon Stewart in an interview on Jon Stewart's, ill-fated Apple TV show. And Jon Stewart took Gary Gensler apart, shred by shred, and proved and showed to him in no uncertain terms that he was one of the worst and most corrupt public officials in America. It doesn't matter. I mean, it would be great to give Americans a chance to participate in Bitcoin, but if Gary Gensler wants Americans to be poor, uneducated, living in the gutter, and being killed by the ravages of inflation, that's up to Gary Gensler. He's got blood on his hands. Gary, you schmuck. You should just resign and give the world the benefit of not having you have a public office. You're a gross, disgusting human. Well, a couple things. As far as Bitcoin not being tested, I mean, the same argument was made about the horse. Back in the 1920s, it had been the primary means of transportation for 3,000 years. Then the car came around, and within 10 years, we didn't see many horses anymore. Bitcoin is that kind of step change in technology and money, where it obviates and kind of makes everything that came before it completely obsolete. And that's what we're seeing, and it's proven itself in the amount of time it's existed to be a suitable replacement for fiat money and gold. And that's why it's driving adoption. That's why countries like El Salvador are making it legal tender. And so that would be my answer to question number one. Question number two is that, markets are discounting mechanisms. And I think the move to 70,000 we saw in Bitcoin was discounting the future of a post-fiat money world. And now, as we see that history catching up to reality, you've got a pullback. It's off, 40% from its high, and it's building a base at this level, 40,000. And I still have 220,000 as a target. And I still think it could be hit in 2022, right? That's certainly within reason when you look at the fact that this fiat money world is collapsing, the central banks are collapsing, the one in Lebanon collapsed, the European Central Bank, the ECB, is collapsing, the Federal Reserve Bank is, I think, under enormous strain now. It's being adopted by countries, made legal tender in various countries. The adoption curve is increasing. All the fundamentals are incredibly strong and getting stronger. So therefore, those critics who are still in the room are reduced to ad hominem attacks and making ludicrous claims as they're doing now, because they have no substantive arguments to make. So they'll say, they'll make wild claims, as they do, and the Bitcoin doesn't care. It's still going to continue on the way it's going to continue on. I have seen in my almost 12 years in Bitcoin, a lot of people capitulate. A lot of critics who were adamantly against Bitcoin, including Michael Saylor. Michael Saylor in 2013, he didn't like Bitcoin. He's tweeting about how he didn't think it was going to work. He then capitulated. Probably watched Keiser Report enough to finally figure out that he was wrong. This is true in many, many cases where people who start off skeptical or critical of Bitcoin, they eventually capitulate because they do the work. Anybody who does the work, and as Michael Saylor has said, anyone who spends 100 hours actually doing the work to understand Bitcoin becomes a Bitcoin maximalist. Nobody who's ever done the work into Bitcoin ever comes out the other side being critical of Bitcoin. The price is becoming less and less of a factor because they've entered into hyper-Bitcoinization. It's become a unit of account. So people don't ask what the price of the dollar is, and people aren't going to be asking what the price of Bitcoin is, because it just becomes a unit of account. That's where we're headed. We're headed toward hyper-Bitcoinization, where people are just immersed in a Bitcoin world, and the price in fiat terms is not really going to matter much. It's not really going to be discussed because we've moved beyond fiat. And with hyper-Bitcoinization comes a lot of other societal goods and benefits, which are more philosophical, but nevertheless, there's a huge benefit coming beyond just the use of Bitcoin as the ultimate store of value and medium of exchange.